I left this last subtopic as the most exciting one, at least for me, for the end, and I'll explain soon why. You have earlier mentioned the Egyptian 10 plagues and how many scholars are actually explaining that these behind these 10 plagues, they were not just a pharaoh. God attacking Pharaoh and just the land of Egypt, but that actually God was doing spiritual warfare.
Right.
And by putting those 10 plagues, he was attacking the Egyptian deities behind this. And this is perfectly in the theme of our channel, what we think, read, and talk about. This channel, this ministry has started primarily by being influenced and inspired by late Dr. Heiser, who
Oh,
has
that's right.
written and taught so much about this, when it comes to the the so-called divine council, and how the gods mentioned in the Old Testament, and how Paul calls them in the New Testament as principalities, powers, authorities, dominions, and so on. How these entities are actually real beings, and this has sparked my interest to start learning more about these things and to start a channel. So when I read the 10th chapter in your book, The Myth Made Fact, I just have to read something for our audience, and I would like you to expand on this. You have named this, the 10th chapter, Titans versus Olympians,
Right.
where Zeus cast the Titans down to the fiery depths of Tartarus. And now I'm giving a quote. Whereas Hades is a gloomy place of sorrow and regret, Tartarus is a place of punishment and of pain. It lies as far beneath Hades as Hades is beneath the sky. From deep within their prison, the Titans rage and grind their teeth. But no matter how hard they struggle to break their chains, they cannot escape from their divine confinement. This is on page 63. And then you give cross-reference 2 Peter 2:4 with Genesis 6:4, Enoch, and Jude 1:6. And then you explain that here hell is not Hades or Gehenna, but Tartarus on page 65. Now, I was so happy when I read this, because I already had few episodes with different guests talking about the same topic, how even in extra biblical sources we found these things, and how that doesn't mean that the Bible stole it, but actually the Bible used terminology from that era where that people were familiar with these certain phrases, illustrations, metaphors, and terms. So then when Paul and Peter and others were writing the scriptures, people from that time knew what was the context, the cultural and the historical context behind these things. They knew Enoch, even though the Enoch was not part of the scriptures, but they knew this as part of their Jewish tradition, and also, especially for people who are living in the Greek region and surrounding places, including those pagans who converted to Christianity. They knew about Tartarus. They knew about Zeus fighting with the Titans and the giants and putting them, actually condemning them to Tartarus as the prison. And now we see Peter writes about this. And I enjoy this because it reminds me of our beloved late Dr. Michael Heiser. And so I just wanted to ask you, isn't this, first, before I ask you, I want to say, isn't it amazing how we can find, even outside the Bible, so much sources, so much data, so much evidence that can encourage our faith? And then if the answer to you is yes, then how much more boldness and confidence we should have when we go to church, but also when we talk with secular people who don't believe in faith, once when we have all this data.
It's amazing. And before we talk about the Tartarus, another thing Michael Heiser talks about, and I'm noticing more and more Christians write about this, and you've probably seen it yourself now, Nicola, and that is, you remember the famous moment in Caesarea Philippi when Jesus says to Peter, you are the rock, and on this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. Right? Now we know that where he did was a place of pagan worship. They thought it was the gateway to hell. It was linked to Pan and all. It's unbelievable. So Jesus is declaring his literally, the gates of hell shall not prevail. That's just amazing, right? But this is amazing, right? So in the New Testament, whenever you see the word hell, about half the time it's really the word Hades, which is sort of the Greek equivalent of Sheol. The other half, you see Gehenna. Jesus particularly uses Gehenna. Gehenna was the place where they used to take the children that they had sacrificed to Moloch and burn them there. And then later, apparently, it was a garbage that always burning. It was a powerful example of hell and punishment, right? But there's only one time in all the scriptures or the New Testament when they don't use Hades and they don't use Gehenna, they use Tartarus. And amazingly, it's in that passage from 2 Peter when it says that the angels who rebel, God locked them in Tartarus. Now, most of your translations are going to say hell, but if there's a note, the note will tell you Greek Tartarus. Now, what I love about this is, I remember reading that as a kid and just taking for granted that what Peter was talking about was the angels that rebelled with Satan, which you can read about in the 67th book of the Bible. You know what the 67th book of the Bible is? Nicola, it's Paradise Lost by John Milton. But that's probably not what he's referring to. It's probably, as Michael Heiser, the late Michael Heiser, who is now with the Divine Council, hopefully giving him good advice, he explains to us that no, what it probably is linked to the book of Enoch is look, I don't know if when you took classes, but Genesis 6 said that the sons of God, saw the daughters of men, that they were good to, and they slept with them. And it seems pretty literally to mean angelic creatures, but most Protestants like myself that are supposed to be rational minded said, no, that's impossible. It must be a reference to the sons of Seth, the goodly line of Seth, and the daughters of Cain. But that's not what it says, right? And the belief is that it's those angels that sinned that are locked up. And that fits more with 2 Peter and Jude and whatnot. But also what Dr. Michael Heiser said in his book, Demons, that what most people believe the demons were is that the children of the sons of God and the daughters of men were the Nephilim, the giants. And when the Nephilim died, their souls were the demons. And apparently that was a pretty common belief in the time of Jesus and just before. That's really when Michael Heiser. But the important thing, Nicola, is the name of his book is The Unseen Realm. What is it? Reclaiming the supernatural world of the God. Basically, he's trying to remind us of the supernatural world in which Jesus taught. Our world has gotten more and more. I don't know if you're into what is that called? Charles Taylor. What was the name of his book? The Age, the Secular Age. Are you familiar with that? Charles Taylor, the Secular, very very big sociologist. Anyway, he showed how today we live in a buffered universe where we feel safe and science cuts us off, whereas back then they lived in a porous world where the spiritual was always invading into the material. And some of those people that believed it were actual pagans and neo-pagans, but some of them were Christians, some of them were Jews. But we have buffered ourselves and protected ourselves for so long that we forget that there is a spiritual warfare that is going on, right? And I'm sure you know that everybody's favorite passage is when Daniel prayed for God's help, and a long time later, Michael shows up and says, I'm the answer to your prayer, but I couldn't get here because I was delayed by the Prince of Persia, which seems to be an actual spiritual warfare. So sometimes when God's prayers are delayed, there might be a pretty wild reason for that. Okay? Again, that doesn't mean we look for a demon under every stone, but we need to understand that we live in a multi-dimensional world, the real multiverse, okay? Because heaven is not up there. Heaven is right alongside us, another dimension. It's always breaking. N.T. Wright talks about how heaven is always breaking in, not just up, right? And again, we don't understand. God lives outside of time in eternity, which is like a perpetual present. But we need to be challenged about these things and stop. I mean, come on. How many people do you, maybe even people that went to Moody, how many people do you know that believe every miracle in the Bible, they believe it literally and will fight for it? But when a miracle happens today, they're immediately skeptical. Now, again, we need to test the spirits and discern the spirits. That's important. But we should not immediately dismiss anything supernatural. I mean, it's the same God. He hasn't changed. And so it was just great to have a scholar like Dr. Heiser, who was such a serious scholar, be open to the spiritual realm without becoming a new ager or something like that. Craig Keener, who wrote a multi-volume book on miracles, it's another one, a super scholar, but he's open to the miraculous. I think his wife is actually African. He's been to Africa. He's seen the unseen realm, and we can't just pretend like it doesn't exist. We are part of a spiritual struggle or warfare. If you go on, what is it, the Gospel Coalition, and type in my name, I've got a long review of the unseen realm up on the Gospel. So go there, type in Louis Marcos, and then you can find it about that spiritual warfare, because it's really a great book, and it's quite accessible. Some of his other books are less so, but that one's pretty accessible.
Yeah, I think if someone would ask me in my church, hey, what is the book that you recommend besides the Bible that I must read in my life? I would be between some of the Tozer's work, which changed my life,
Oh, yeah.
How to Rejoice in the Lord, and I will go probably Michael Heiser, because without that context of the how to see the Bible, which was written in the ancient Near East context, we misinterpret so many Bible passages.
Yeah.
And Dr. Michael Heiser's work, he's not the only one, but
Yeah.
his work is he explains the things on the level of a layman, and
Right.
helps us so much to understand what was happening behind the scenes, because we came so far after the times of the Bible, and we need to know that context.